Am I on? Okay. Gotta remember how to do this. What's the word? What's the word? Banyan House. Oops, there goes my glasses. What is his name? Do I even know? Nope, I don't. Didn't have the heart that book because that's what they because of his nativeness. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather and as always I'm reading with a vengeance and I hope you are too. It's been a while since my last video, since I sat down to record. I know a lot has been going on. I think most of you who watch me regularly probably can figure out why, but I'll get into that. How is everybody doing? I've missed you all. I've missed engaging with you in the comments. I've missed talking about books, although, I mean, I'm still working at a bookstore, so I still talk about books quite a lot. But you know what I mean. I miss this whole thing we got going on here. I hope you all have been reading some good books. I hope you are having a good summer. I just hope everything with everybody is going well. As I said, of course, there have been a couple of things that have kept me from recording. As you all know, my beautiful, beloved reading partner, Zoe, crossed the Rainbow Bridge in May. And we knew for a long time that she was sick. She had degenerative myelopathy. I always get that second word wrong. The good news is that she was never in any pain. My husband and I struggled for a while. We thought, well, how are we going to know when the right time is? But when the time did come, she let us know. We could tell she was ready. We went through an organization that comes to your home. It was done very well. She went very peacefully. I spent her last 72 hours in her life by her side. You know, of course, it was heartbreaking and devastating and sad, but I couldn't think of a better way for her to go. And, you know, I miss her, but mostly the feelings I get are just strange that she's not around anymore. It's just really weird not seeing her all the time. And then the other feeling I get is just the joy she brought into my life. And I know we gave her a good life. So yeah, she'll be missed. Jake is doing well. He was a little weird for a couple of days. He was looking for her a couple of times for a few days. But now that it's been a few weeks, he's really embracing being an only child and he's gotten more affectionate. He's just turned into a big old cuddle bug. Anyways, things are fine. I do want to thank all of you for the beautiful, lovely, heartfelt messages that you sent me, sending prayers my way and letting me know that you were thinking about me and sharing your experiences that you've had with the Rainbow Bridge. You just really made my heart smile during a really, really hard time. So thank you all so much for your support. The other thing that took up my time, my mom came out to visit in the beginning of June and we stayed here for a couple of days, but then we went to Paris together. It was kind of a combined trip. I knew I was going to go to the Women's Prize in London and I knew I didn't want to spend my entire time in London since that's what I did last year. So I decided to split the time in Paris because I'd never been there before. I'd never been to France. And then I thought, you know, my mom's birthday was in May. I thought, you know what? It would be fun for her to come with me. And it was kind of a birthday present for her. And I think she would enjoy the Women's Prize. So yeah, we went to Paris and it was, I'm not going to get too much into the details about that trip because I think that'll be a separate video. I vlogged some. I took a lot, well, some video, I think enough to make a video and share with you how that trip went. It was an amazing, amazing trip, which I will get into in another video. And then the other thing that's been going on, this is really, really great news. I was promoted at work. Around the end of July, I will be the assistant manager there at the bookstore. And so I've been doing a lot of training. My hours have been getting a little bit more because I will be going from part-time to full-time. So it's been really, really busy at work. So lots going on. But that doesn't mean I haven't been reading. I actually have picked up, I think, about 16 books since my last wrap-up video. I'm not going to talk about all of them here. I'm going to split it up. Let's just get into it. Let's talk about the books that I've read. All right, the first book I'm going to talk about is Banyan Moon by Tao Tai. I listened to this on audio. I'm pretty sure this came on my radar, and I shared this book on one of my new releases I'm excited about sometime last year, so it's been sitting on my shelf for quite a while. This is a story about 3 generations of Vietnamese American women. We have Min, who is the grandmother, Huang, who is the mother, and Anne is the daughter slash granddaughter. We mostly follow Anne. She's a young woman living, I want to say, in Chicago. I can't really remember. It's been a while, but somewhere up in that area. She's successful in her career. She's very driven. She has very specific ideas of what her life should look like. She's got the perfect boyfriend slash fiance. They have the perfect house. They have the perfect circle of friends. Everything is great until an unexpected pregnancy and a betrayal. And then on top of that, she gets a phone call from her mom saying her beloved grandmother has passed away. So all those things make Anne go back to her childhood home to kind of help her mother make arrangements and deal with the aftermath of all of that. Now, Anne's relationship with her mother is fractured, and there's a constant tension between them. And on top of that, Anne's mother is somewhat resentful of the relationship that Anne had with her grandmother, Huang's mother, because of course Huang and her mother had kind of a fractured relationship, which in turn affected the relationship that Huang had with Anne. So this is mostly a story about mother-daughter relationships. So the story spans multiple decades, from back in the 60s in Vietnam during the war to the present day, and it's told in multiple perspectives. So you get Min's perspective back in the 60s, but you also get her perspective after she's passed. I found that interesting, and I enjoyed that part of the story, mostly because it reminded me of Cecile Penn's Wandering Souls, which I absolutely loved. It was on last year's Women's Prize for Fiction. But then you get Anne's perspective, like when she was a teenager and what happened between her and her mom. And then you get Huang's perspective as she's raising Anne and her life with her husband and her relationship with her own mom, and how just everything kind of affects generationally. I thought the narration was very good. I did enjoy the story. I did not like Anne at first because she treated her mom so badly, but then I realized that's so realistic, especially from a teenager's point of view. I still cringe when I think of some of the things I said and did to my mom as a teenager. So I ultimately ended up really appreciating the realism captured about the complicated relationships that mothers and daughters have. The title, The Banyan House, refers to the home that Min lived in and Huang lived in, and Anne at one point lived in as well. Oh, the title is Banyan Moon, isn't it? Well, you know what I mean. I don't know why it's called Banyan Moon when it should be called the Banyan House. The Banyan House is what the home is referred to because of all the banyan trees, and it's in Florida. I will say the writing was such that the Banyan House is somewhat of a character in the story. I appreciated that kind of atmospheric quality to the book. There are a couple of other side stories that I won't get into details about. They are better appreciated as you read the story, but it was mostly about relationships between mothers and daughters, what we choose to pass from one generation to the other, what we choose to withhold. There is also themes of the impact of war, immigrating to the United States, and finding belonging in your life. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. I mean, I liked it. I didn't love it. I would recommend it though. It's a good historical fiction family drama type story. Next, I read Lightfall, The Girl in the Galdurian by Tim Probert or Probert. This is a graphic novel. It's the first in a series. As of right now, there are 3 in the series. I'm not sure if there's going to be more. It's actually a children's graphic novel, and I heard about it through another booktuber. I can't remember now who it was. but they raved about it and thought it was absolutely adorable. And I found the cover engaging. This is a fantasy about a girl in a fantasy world. She lives with her grandfather, absolutely adores him. He's a forgetful wizard, and one day he goes missing, and this story follows her journey as she goes and looks for him. And she meets up with this creature known as a Galdurian, who the girl, B is her name, her and everybody that she knows thought that Galdurians were, I think, extinct. And when they weren't extinct, they were creatures to be feared. When she happens upon the Galdurian, she is initially fearful and untrusting, and he's happy-go-lucky, wants to join her on her journey. He's kind of silly. He's really kind of a fun character, and they become friends and they go on this journey together. And the story goes from there, and it's adorable. It's super cute. B is the type of character she is. She loves her grandfather. She suffers a little of anxiety. She's very self-conscious. She doesn't have any confidence in herself at all. She's super, super smart, but she just doesn't give herself enough credit. So her friendship with the Galdurian teaches her some things. I really enjoyed the color palette. I'm going to pop in some pictures or video here that I took of the inside pages. So it's really kind of a delight to the eye. And if you have kids, I would recommend it. It's a cute little story. Will I go on with the series? Probably not. Not because I didn't like it, because I did. And I like children's stories, but it's not just something that I would seek out. I don't feel compelled to find out what happens, but I did enjoy it for what it is. Next, I read The River We Remember by William Kent Kruger. This is his latest book. It is historical fiction with a little bit of a murder mystery included. So this one takes place in a small Minnesota town. Many of his stories, if not all of them, are up in that northern wilderness area near the Canadian border. But this one takes place in 1958. And that's important because the story opens up on Memorial Day. And this was a time when Memorial Day meant less about barbecues and family gatherings and more about actually honoring the folks who didn't come back from the very recent wars. But for some reason, as I was reading this book, I kept forgetting it was 1958. I can't really put my finger on why, but other than occasional conversations referring to the recency of World War II, I kept forgetting that it was 1958. It just came across as very contemporary to me. But I mean, I'm not going to hold that against the book. So what else is this about? Okay, so the town is kind of gathering to honor the fallen, and a dead body is discovered in the river. And it turns out that that body belongs to one of the most powerful men in the town, and also the most feared and hated in the town. And before the body is even cold, rumors start flying that the killer is a local Native American man, Noah Bluestone, I think he was called, who fought in World War II, but he came back with a Japanese wife. He's already kind of looked down upon by the townsfolk because of his nativeness, so he's always been kind of on the outskirts of things in this town. But there was also previous grievances between Noah and the murder victim, Jimmy Quinn, I believe is his name. And as the murder is investigated further and further, more things are found out, town secrets come out, and everything kind of comes to the head. So you're following through this story mostly Sheriff Brody Dern, and he kind of has his own demons that he's fighting because he also served. He suffers a little bit of PTSD before it was even a thing. You're also following a single mother who works for the local diner and her adolescent son. She is a war widow, and her son is dealing with a heart defect. And there's a whole coming of age side story that involves this kid that I really, really enjoyed. And then you're also following this investigation through the eyes of a local newspaperman. There's a couple of other smaller characters throughout the story, but these are the main characters, and they're all very well developed. They are all affected by the war. And not just peripherally, I mean directly affected. And it really affects how they behave, how they go about this murder investigation. They all have secrets, and it's a good story. There are themes, of course, of racism, of the American belief in land ownership, effects of PTSD, effects of abuse. I enjoyed this story very much. I didn't love it. I felt it didn't have the heart that Ordinary Grace had, or This Tender Land. So it didn't really move me like those other books did. His writing is top notch. Of course, I'll continue to read his backlist. If you like historical fiction, small town murder, I would definitely recommend it. If you like this author, then absolutely read this book because it is quintessential Kruger. Next up is The Rachel Incident by Caroline or Carolyn O'Donoghue. This is contemporary Irish literary fiction. This one I think has gotten a lot of hype on YouTube, so I picked it up. I listened to this on audio, and you know, there is something about Irish literature, in which it's usually narrated by an Irish person, and there's something about that Irish lilt that makes it sound like whatever story they're telling, it's a good story. For the most part, I enjoyed this, but let me tell you what it was about. This takes place over two timelines. You have present day, and then you have 10 years ago. The story opens up with the titular Rachel. She is working in London as a journalist, but she is an Irish woman. And at a work event, she runs into an old classmate from university who tells her that their English professor, Professor Byrne, is in a coma. And the mention of Professor Byrne's name sends Rachel into a panic. And of course, I'm not going to tell you exactly why that is. I will just tell you that her connection to her professor is the reason she was kind of driven out of Ireland and had her name in her academic circles and even a little bit of her professional circle kind of dragged through the mud. So then you're going kind of back and forth in time, but mostly 10 years ago, you are learning how Rachel gets to where she's at and why Rachel is kind of in a panic. This is a coming of age of a woman who has graduated college and she is starting adulthood. And it was at a time around 2008 where there's an economic crisis and there's a recession that follows. So she's having a hard time finding decent work. But she ends up getting a job at a bookstore where she meets James, and they become fast friends. Nothing romantic. They become really, really good friends, best friends, if you will. They move in together. And Rachel tells James that she has a crush on her English teacher. And so they conspire to kind of make something happen between the two. But something completely different happens. And there are consequences. Rachel also meets another man named James, and since her best friend's name is James, to avoid confusion, she ends up calling him by his last name, which is Carey. I don't know why the author would choose to name two main characters or two main people in the main character's life the same thing. I don't understand why an author would do that. Anyways, she gets into this relationship with Carey. It's passionate. I think they fall in love with each other, but he's very standoffish. He disappears for long periods of time and she doesn't understand what's going on. And so that's a whole thing. And then she also develops a friendship with her English professor's wife, Deanie. And that has consequences as well, as they would. So this book read a little bit like I would imagine a Sally Rooney reads. I've never read Sally Rooney. I've heard other people review her books, and I just get the feeling that they're kind of slice of life books, somewhat coming of age, but not a whole lot happens plot-wise. And this book read like that. Rachel is an interesting character. She's very three-dimensional. I think she was very well developed, as were the two Jameses and her relationship with them, and the complications of relationships, especially during that time where you're just kind of entering adulthood and kind of finding your feet. You know, those relationships, those developing relationships are important and awkward. And I felt like the author kind of captured that very well. But I will say the first half of this book is somewhat slow. I think the thing that kept me going was, listening to it, having an Irish author read it to me. And I think Rachel was an interesting character, and that kind of kept me going. But plot-wise, the first half is quite slow. The second half, though, makes it worth the read. A lot happens. The people who falsely accuse other people of doing stuff, they learned what really happened, and you pretty much want that the entire book. You want so-and-so to know that that's not the way things went down. It went down this way. And I found that kind of drama very engaging. I think you'll be glad you read it if you decide to read this book. I thought it was very well written. I would read something else by this author. I think it does deserve the hype because it just was a slow burn. That's all. But I really enjoyed it. Next up is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. I have been looking forward to this book for so long, and I just didn't have as good a time with it as I thought I would. And shame on me, because the first book I read by this author was the Book of Form and Emptiness, which won the Women's Prize. Was it last year or the year before? I don't remember. I enjoyed it, but it was weird. It was weirdly structured. It was a weird story, and it was just weird. This one's weird too. Okay, let's talk about what it's about. So you've got dual perspective. You're following Ruth, and this is not autobiographical, but you're following Ruth, who is a writer who lives on a very remote island in Canada, and she lives there with her husband. And she has been trying to write a memoir for a really long time, but she's been struggling with it, and she can't really, I guess she's dealing with writer's block. And one day she finds like a lunchbox washed up from the bay, and inside she finds some really weird stuff, like a really old wristwatch and some Japanese letters that look really old. And then inside it is also kind of a diary from what turns out to be Now, who is a young Japanese girl. I want to say she's like 13 or 14. So Ruth starts to read this diary and get to know this girl. And then the other perspective is Now's story. And Now is telling this story of how she and her family used to live in California because her father worked for this company, and they were very affluent, but he ends up losing his job, and they have to move back to Japan, and he gets a crap job, and they live in a crap apartment, and Now is very resentful of her father for making her life hell. Now also talks about being bullied at school. So anyways, you're following Ruth's story, and you're following Now's story, and you're following kind of Now's story through Ruth as well. And the more Ruth finds out about Now, the more she is worried about Now, because Now starts to write about how she wants to commit suicide, but not until she tells her grandmother's story. And her grandmother is this nun who lives in this temple on top of this hill. Now spends a summer with her and kind of learns all about what it's like to be a Buddhist nun. And she learns about peace and controlling your emotions and just being a little bit more self-aware, and Now learns a lot about her grandmother. And I realize as I'm telling you about this book that I'm just kind of all over the place. And this book was all over the place. It was very strange to me. I liked parts of it, and other parts I was incredibly bored. I just felt like I wasn't getting the connection between things. There's also a little bit of magical realism in this book, because there's a point in time where Ruth is reading the diary, and when she first opens the diary, she reads a few pages, and then she flips through the end, and she sees that Now has filled the diary. The diary is completely full, cover to cover. As she gets further into the diary, and she starts to worry about whether or not Now kills herself, she flips to the end of the diary again, and she sees that some of the pages are blank now. I'm not real. This book might have been a little over my head. It just wasn't for me, I don't think, unfortunately. I like the way Ruth writes characters, The story, I just didn't understand the connection with all the different elements of this story. You know, with a writer with writer's block who lives in Canada, to a teenage girl who lives in Japan, who's got a fractious relationship with her father, the school bullying, the nun on top of the mountain in the temple. The connection didn't come for me. I wish I liked this more than I did. Here's another thing. Why did Ruth name her main character, a writer, Ruth, in her fictional novel? That was distracting to me. So I didn't really care for this book. Don't tell my boss, because this is one of her favorite books. Melissa, if you're watching, I'm really, really sorry. It just didn't work for me. Oh. Next book I attempted to read was Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. This one also got a lot of talk. I tried to listen to this book. So, of course, the synopsis of this book is the main character works as a transcriptionist for a psychiatrist, and she becomes involved in one of the psychiatrist's patients. Of course, very inappropriate. And I guess things go badly, as they would. And the title refers to the nickname that the main character gives to this patient that she ends up getting into a relationship with. I guess she has this accent and she's tall and blonde, I think. I DNF this at 34%. And I'll tell you, 34%, a third of the way through the book, the main character hadn't even met Big Swiss yet. And I might have gone on with the story if it wasn't so bogged down with really weird details. Like, the main character moves into this house, and it's this old house. There's a lot of time spent describing how in the kitchen there's a beehive, and the owner of the house, I guess, doesn't have the heart to take the beehive out of the house, and so there's constantly bees buzzing around the house, and there's dead bees on the floor, and on about the bees. Have nothing to do with the story. And that's not even the only weird detail that it goes on about that has nothing to do with the story. So I got very frustrated. I wanted to get into the relationship with Big Swiss, and I just didn't have the patience for it. Also, I didn't mention before, I listened to this, and the main character is supposed to be a 45-year-old woman, mature woman. Not only the narrator's voice and tone that she used for the main character, but I think how she's written as well. She came off as someone in her early 20s. That put me off as well. So I didn't care for this one. I didn't finish it. Yeah, so another DNF, and it's not my last one. The next book I attempted was Hemlock Island by Kelly Armstrong. This one I'm kind of embarrassed about, and I feel really bad about, because this was a book that I featured on another one of my new releases that I'm really excited about. This is marketed as a horror/mystery thriller. I listened to this one as well, and I will say the narrator had a little bit to do with why I didn't finish. I did not like the way she spoke, narrated, or whatever. She ended every single sentence with huge emphasis on the last syllable, the last letter. If it ended in a hard D or T, I mean, it would be word and distant or distance. Oh, it was so annoying. Every single sentence ended like that. Made me crazy. Anyways, you're following a main character who, I guess she got in a divorce. She got this house on an island, and she, instead of living in it, she rents it out as an Airbnb. One day she gets a really nasty message that there was blood found in a closet, scratch marks, and so she ends up going out to the island to find out what the heck is going on, and she ends up going with, I don't know, her best friend, a brother, a cousin, a group of people. And they lose power on the island, and bodies start dropping. And it's one of those like isolation murder mysteries. I feel like this was more of a YA horror. I feel like a lot was told and not shown. It came off as very juvenile for an adult mystery thriller. thought that the story was silly. I thought the characters were silly. The way they talked to each other was silly. I just didn't like the way it was written. I DNF'd this one at 53%, which big frustration must have been going on for me to DNF after I'm already invested so much time to read more than half the book. So that's unfortunate. Another DNF. I am getting more and more comfortable tossing out books that I just don't have patience for. Anybody else have better luck with this book? I'd love to hear about any of it. The Big Swiss one too. I'd love to hear if you had better luck with these books. The next book I read was Greenwich Park by Catherine Faulkner. I read this because it was a selection for the It's a Mystery Book Club that I co-run with the co-owner of the bookshop I work for, the book club that we run each month. So this one, of course, for It's a Mystery Book Club, it is a mystery. It is contemporary, and you're following mostly Helen. And I have to say, as I first started reading this book, I did not like Helen very much. I really was annoyed with her. She is one of those women who just can't say no to anybody or anything. She's so self-conscious that she just is a doormat, and she was just very annoying to me. But the mystery itself was intriguing enough to keep me going. I continued, and I'm glad that I did. So the title of the book, Greenwich Park, that is a very posh suburb of London, I believe. Very wealthy people live there, including our main character, Helen, who lives in this old historic mansion that she actually grew up in. This was her parents' home, and now she lives in it with her husband. I guess Helen's father was a famous architect, and now her husband works in her father's architect firm with Helen's brother. Helen is pregnant, and the further her pregnancy progresses, the more her life kind of unravels. The story opens up with this strange letter that is addressed to Helen, and it's from somebody in prison. You don't know who the letter is from, but you know it is somebody close to Helen. This person has done something bad. It's just very vague and ambiguous, and it kind of sets the tone for the story. So that's how the story opens up, and you follow Helen as she is progressing through her pregnancy. Her sister-in-law, the woman who is married to her brother, is also pregnant, and she wanted to go to like birthing classes together, and she shows up to the first class, and I think Simone is her name, her sister-in-law. She doesn't show up. She's really bummed about that. And you can tell as the story progresses that Helen really idolizes Simone, tries to emulate her almost to the point of creepiness. But anyways, at this birthing class, she meets Rachel, another Rachel in my stories. Rachel, who's this young girl who attends the birthing class, and she's very loud. She's very just inappropriate and not very self-aware, is kind of loud and obnoxious, and is very nonchalant about her own pregnancy. And she offers Helen to be her partner because she's there by herself too. And Helen is very hesitant to do that. She feels very uncomfortable around this Rachel girl, but she does because she doesn't say no to anybody, and she lets anybody get away with anything with her. And so they develop this friendship. And there's so many things about Rachel where I think anybody in Helen's shoes, from Helen's background, her upbringing, her whole circle of friends and family, would have ditched Rachel from the get-go. But then where would we be in this story if that happened? So Rachel is just very off-putting. And then some other things start to happen in Helen's life. She starts getting these weird phone calls from a mortgage lender talking about refinancing her family home when her and her husband have not applied for any kind of mortgage. She also discovers this old photograph, I think from her college days, which was torn and discarded years ago, and she finds it in her husband's belongings. which is really weird. All these weird things start happening. I will say that this is another one where the first half of the book, it's somewhat slow. There's enough going on where you're intrigued and you want to know who this Rachel person is and why she has insinuated herself into Helen's life. You know her husband's up to something no good. You know that Simone is a little off as well, and Simone's husband, Helen's brother, something going on there. You know things are happening that are a little off, and the story keeps you intrigued. There's also very, very short chapters that makes this a very fast read. So the first half of the book, though, is a little bit slow. Not as slow as the first half of the Rachel incident. I was intrigued enough, and you will be. The second half of the book, it ended up being really, really good, and I flew through it. This was a pretty decent mystery. I liked it way more than I thought I would, especially when I started off not liking the main character. So this was a pretty good read, and I'm actually pretty impressed because I think this is her debut novel. Yeah, this one came out in 2021, and her other book, The Other Mothers, came out last year, I believe, which I haven't read that one. But I enjoyed this book. It was, I think, a unique mystery. It doesn't go down the road you think it's going to go down. You're constantly wondering what the heck is going on with this Rachel chick. Is she a good person? Is she a bad person? You think, was she involved with Helen's husband? Was she involved in Serena? That's the sister-in-law's name. Serena's husband. Is she involved with Serena? What is going on? Is she really pregnant? It really keeps you on your toes and asking questions, and a very satisfying ending. Some people might say it wrapped up too quickly or ended too abruptly. I thought it was perfect for this story. I would recommend this if you have only read The Other Mothers and you're wondering about this one. I would definitely pick this one up. It was a pretty good, quick read. The final book I'm going to talk to you about, I am super excited to talk to you about because it's a book that hasn't even come out yet. Well, I say that, and I'm not even sure when I'm going to publish this video. So the book I'm going to talk to you about doesn't come out until June 25th, but I read the advanced reader's copy, and I absolutely loved it, you guys. I'm so happy to end this video on a good note, on a book that I absolutely loved, a book that it will probably end up on my year favorites list. The book I'm talking about is All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. His other book, We Begin at the End, was one of my favorites in the year that I read it. Absolutely loved it. Was super excited about this book. Okay, so here's the thing though. I can't really tell you a whole lot about the plot because so much of what happens, it's just, there's too many spoilery things. So I can give you the basics of the plot. You start off following a boy who I think is 11 or 12 years old. He goes by the nickname of Patch because he is missing one eye and he wears a patch. And he befriends a girl named Saint who has an interesting story herself. Saint and Patch become fast friends, really close friends, the kind of friendship that just really moves you and makes your heart happy. And then one day, Misty, who is the daughter of, I want to say, the town mayor, wealthy, popular, beautiful Misty, she almost becomes a victim of a local serial killer, and she is rescued by a very unlikely hero, Patch. But her rescue kind of sends different characters on rocky paths. So big, I know. So much happens in this book, but it's all like a trickle effect. Like one thing causes something else and causes something else and causes something else. And so if I told you about one thing that happens, it would just give too much away. There's too much beauty in this book that needs to be discovered by reading it. I just don't want to ruin it for you. The writing is perfect, spectacular. I will say this, the first 10 to 20 pages of this book, the writing set me back a little bit. It was a little confusing, and I don't really know how to explain it other than the structure of his sentences made me slow way down. Like I really had to concentrate on the words and what each sentence said. And at first that was frustrating for me because I like to just get into a story and just read and not have to worry about making my brain understand stuff. So when it first started, I was a little disappointed because I'm like, oh my God, what is happening here? Why did he change his writing style so much? But after I got into it, got used to it, it was fine. The other thing that kind of worried me about this book is it's over 600 pages long. It's a little bit of a chunker. You don't feel it. It's the perfect length. The chapters are very short. Did I mention that the writing is spectacular? It's beautiful. This book is beautiful. I highly recommend it. It's in a small town where everybody kind of knows everybody. It starts in 1975 and it goes to 2001, I believe. You are mostly following Patch and you're mostly following Saint and how their lives came together and then how they kind of separated and then reconnected again. And it's beautiful. I absolutely love this book. It's so good, you guys. I feel like I'm blubbering now. As I mentioned before, part of the story begins with a character almost becoming a victim to a serial killer. So there is a crime fiction element to this story, but it's not what you think. It's not so much about the crime as it is about how stuff like that affects lives, and when it affects the lives of these people, the decisions they make based on the effects that it has on their lives. I'm doing a terrible job, I know, of this. All I can do is tell you that I absolutely love this book, and I hope you do too. So that is it. Those are the books that I've read so far. That's the update I have for you, where I've been for the past couple of months. I will be filming again and posting another video relatively soon with more books that I've read, because I think I have like 8 more to talk to you about. Anyways, have you guys read any of these books? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you all so much for watching and hanging in there and being patient with me. I am back. I will see you again next time.